Well, hello, A Taste of AZ podcast listeners. We are here today with a very renowned guest who has been mentioned on the podcast several times before, but that we have not chatted with yet. I myself, Luke Irvin, am one of your hosts. We have Eric Walters as well, and the wonderful Christina Barueta. And our guest, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and where we are?
This is Chef Matt Carter. We're at the Fat Ox in Scottsdale.
And the Fat Ox is one of many places that you have kind of built up. What is this spot specifically? How do you describe it?
So, you want the long story or the short story?
Let's do the long story. Let's
Okay.
jump
44
right into
hours
it.
of memory code.
Yeah.
So we're
Awesome.
good.
So long story is, and we'll get into some of the other stuff later, but probably in the late 90s, like around 97, 98, I'd really been doing French cuisine, pretty much exclusively. And Christopher, as a matter of fact, he and I went out to Washington, D.C. and did a dinner with
Christopher Gross.
Christopher Gross, correct. With Roberto Donna at a restaurant called Galileo. It's no longer there, but in D.C. And in fact, his sous chef was Michel Richard's son, so he had some French influence in there. But he was a chef from Piedmont in northern Italy. And he just kind of blew my mind on some of the food and the products and what he was using, what he was doing, and kind of changed this whole perception in my head of Italian cuisine. So that went, another, 12 years plus or something along those lines to eventually get to open this restaurant. Kind of specifically wanting to just do pasta. And not that I didn't do pasta in any of the other restaurants, because I did, but, really wanted a venue for that. And I'd had a few opportunities to open something similar to this concept prior. It's always good things that happen for a reason. Those concepts might not have made it. They wouldn't have worked. And they weren't specifically what this ended up being, which was a vision of, to me, authentic, from the boot Italian cuisine, as opposed to maybe a little bit more of what we're used to, which is, what we call a red sauce joint or something like that. Yeah. And kind of also not just the food, but the format as well, coming in, starting with, prosciutto and cheeses and salads and doing tableside Caesars, pasta courses, and then going into entrees and some sides, and kind of just a little bit more of a traditional Italian dining format.
So it was as much about the food as how the experience was to be designed.
Absolutely. And, I'll be honest, some of the other spaces I was looking at, I don't know if we've been able to pull off what we've been able to pull off here, which is pretty darn close to what my initial vision was for those many years and striving to open something. And some of that was, the partnerships and the people that came together to make this restaurant happen, but also the landlord and the space itself and multiple other things, and the talent that we were able to bring in to pull this off and make it happen.
So I want to circle back to the Fat Ox in a little bit and get more into the details of this place, but you mentioned how in late 90s you're running around with Christopher Gross, right? That's obviously a while ago, relatively speaking, but at the same time to be doing those kinds of things so long ago would make you very much a pillar of Arizona food and beverage. I want to go even before that. Where did you grow up? What were you doing when you were growing up?
So I'm born and raised here in Phoenix.
Okay.
And right after high school, so 1988, I went to San Diego for the summer. My father's buddy had a breakfast restaurant out there called the Agri, and there was actually one here on 44th and Camelback at the time as well. And so I got a job washing dishes for the summer. It feels like the same old story that you hear a lot, but by the end of the summer, I was flipping eggs and working on the line. I kind of moved up, mostly because people didn't show up or didn't work, so I was filling in these stations. And I came back to Arizona, and I was supposed to go to ASU. Had not a clue what I was going to do. My family's in the clothing business. I always kind of thought that I would go in some direction in that. And 2 days in at ASU, I'm like, I'm out of here. This is not, I don't want to be in a classroom. I kind of miss that energy. Yeah. I kind of miss that energy of the kitchen.
What were you taking classes for clothing industry?
No, I was probably signed up for like a basic business class,
Sure.
basic like
Some
super
gen eds
intro.
and stuff like that.
Right, because I didn't know, even on the clothing side of it, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. My parents were in retail. And owned clothing stores, but multiple people that had worked for my father over the years had gone on, moved to New York, started clothing lines, worked for Brooks Brothers or something along those lines. So I thought maybe that was kind of a direction that I would go into.
And so at what point did cooking become something you maybe took more personally serious, that you wanted to get better at it, or more in terms of a career?
So I think that part of it is, number one, I'm a super slow learner. Things that are really obvious aren't that obvious. It takes me a little bit of time. So I went, got a job at a breakfast restaurant after getting out of ASU. I worked at Chompy's when it was on Scottsdale and Camelback, actually, which is where Nordstrom's is now, back in the day. And worked breakfast there. And I bounced around for a few years. I worked at Houston's. I worked at a few hotels. The reality of the restaurant world then, as opposed to now, is there just wasn't that much access to information. I didn't know what one restaurant was to another. I didn't know the difference between working in a hotel and working in a freestanding restaurant or a corporate restaurant. I didn't understand the different cuisines. I just knew that I liked the environment. I liked the attitude in the kitchen. I liked the fast pace, the camaraderie. That's what hooked me first. Food was not on my radar, and I eventually got a job at a restaurant called La Chaumière in Old Town Scottsdale. It's actually the tortilla factory now.
Okay.
But that was a classic French bistro all through the 80s and up until sometime in the mid to late 90s before they switched. And I walked in that kitchen as a pantry cook making salads, and I had been there all of an hour, and the chef is, just screaming at me. It's a French guy, barely understood what he said, but I knew instantly that I was in the right spot. Like,
really?
I need direction, right? I need somebody to tell me what to do, otherwise I'm off in, fantasy land or something. So, I like the rigidity of, the restaurant. There's no question what you're supposed to be doing, right? It's right there in front of you. It becomes obvious over time. And so at that point, I realized, okay, it's French cuisine. That's what I want to do. Okay, so I figured that out. This is the direction I want to go. And so I literally saved up, I think it was $3,000, and I moved to Paris.
Really?
Thinking, again, completely ignorant to what the realities are, but that I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to get a job at a high-end French restaurant, which I didn't even really fully grasp what that meant either. Again, very, very ignorant. There wasn't the internet. There weren't books. You had Julia Child maybe and some Better Home and Gardens, but this is pre-Charlie Trotter's books. This is pre the French Laundry book. Where now there's so much information out there. I mean, you can read a book and decide, oh, I really like, kind of an Asian cuisine, or I think I really want to learn how to do, Southwestern. I want to work with chilies and things like that, but I just didn't know that.
I never thought of that, how back then, how you didn't have that knowledge. You kind of just had to throw yourself in it and decide if that's what you like.
And that's what I was doing. I didn't really know that I was doing that. I was working at places and realizing that's not what I wanted. And so I was just kind of checking off the list of no, until I got to something that felt right. And so, I lived in France. I didn't have a visa. I couldn't get hired at a lot of places. I had a pretty steady job that was basically the rule in France is that you can only get hired if you're doing something that a Frenchman can't do. So basically I'm, working places that are like American hotels, where they're serving prime rib and nachos, like super American, like
your
chili.
Expertise.
Yeah. Like, hey, they don't know how to make chili, right? So, hey, I know how to make chili, right? So those were my kind of steady jobs. I had some decent short time experiences at some little bistros, and really that was the cuisine that really I grabbed onto. Just really classic stuff, steak frites, onion soup, etc. And I was out there, my girlfriend moved out there after that. So it was much more of a life experience than it was a culinary experience per se on the kitchen side of it. Obviously, I ate out. I fell in love with everything about it and still do love Paris. I mean, I don't know how you go anywhere in Western Europe and don't do a couple days there. Like, it's amazing, and I love it, and I have gone 30 times since. But
wow.
And then I came back to Phoenix, and that's when I started working for Christopher Gross. Okay. So I worked for him for 6.5 years after that.
And so this story that you've told is reminiscent of Christopher Gross's story. I don't know if you're aware of that. I figure you probably are. And I remember when he was telling us his journey of, going to France and working without a visa, and explained, running from the French police just to be able to continue working. Do you have stories like that as well?
I never had to run from the police, but I was kicked out of kitchens like in a hurry. Like I had been there for a couple of weeks, been there for an hour or two working, and just this frantic leave. You got to go. You got to go. So the inspection process there in a restaurant that would get in trouble for me being in that kitchen was pretty harsh. It was a real thing that they would get fined or possibly even closed. So, and at that point, once that would happen, they'd be like, hey, you got to go, you're out. Because they're paying us under the table, basically.
Well, right? I think that story and the similarities that you two share is such like a spectacular, it's almost enchanting. It sounds like before, now, if I want to go to Paris, I'm looking up flights. I'm analyzing, what the reviews for these different airlines and hotels, and it's major information overload. Whereas with you and Christopher, it's like you just basically decided, well, go, travel across the ocean. I bet back then there were a lot more dangers in traveling. It wasn't 200 years ago, but still freaky.
Well, and a funny story on that is that, I had you have a temporary travel visa when you go there. And so to keep up my travel visa, or in lieu of that, I did a student visa. And I think I had some old bios that said that I went to, was it the Cordon Bleu in Paris? Well, technically yes and technically no. I would go sign up for the classes, which I couldn't afford, get my student visa, and then go and turn that in and extend my visa, and then I would drop out because I couldn't afford it. So I never technically actually took a class there. I just used their process. Simple loophole for a little while. That probably the last 6 months I was there, it was fully illegal. But there was a point in time when it was okay. This is not going the direction I want it to go, and it's time to get back home.
So then you get back to Arizona and you start working under Christopher. At what kind of point in his trajectory, as far as your perspective, is he in at this point?
And for him personally?
Yes.
Okay, so this is probably a year, maybe 2 years after he had opened the original Christopher's on 24th Street in Camelback. So I believe he opened that in 90 or 91, and I'm coming in like 92.
Okay.
Right around that time. And so that original restaurant and that original kitchen had a bistro dining room and then a formal dining room all coming out of the same kitchen. So half the line was people doing the bistro side, and the other half was the formal dining side. And of course, I'm in the bistro, I'm a new kid on the block, and all the formal guys, are pretty intense. They're, they just give you shit basically all day long for everything that you're doing because you don't do anything right, But the goal is to work your way up to move over there. But I didn't fully grasp that still. Again, slow learner here. I had a job. I was working in the bistro at Christopher's. I was happy. I was learning food. And I was always seeing what they were doing over in the other side, what the sous chefs were doing, what the lead guys were doing in the formal dining room with just sauce work and plate work and everything else. And a lot of the stuff in the bistro is kind of done for you, a lot of pre-prep that was happening. So I wasn't as involved in that and wanted to be involved in that. But I didn't really understand it and didn't know it. And one dinner basically, and I know it always sounds silly, this is, what am I, 5 or 6 years into cooking at this point, maybe 5 years. One dinner really changed my whole viewpoint on everything that we were doing. And it was a James Beard dinner at the restaurant we were doing with Charlie Trotter, Robin Haas, and Norman Van Aken, 2 chefs from Florida. And at the end of the dinner, well, not only was it during the dinner, because suddenly I'm seeing food that I've never seen before, right? These other chefs are doing stuff. I had never had any exposure to that, anything on that level. And obviously at the time, these are the top guys in the country. And so watching their food and cooking and going, oh, there's a whole different way to cook artichokes. And I knew one, right? They're doing a totally different, there's a whole different way to make a venison reduction that I'd never seen before. Like suddenly it's like all these new things that I just didn't have exposure to. But after the dinner, we all sat down in the dining room after all the guests had left, and Christopher went to the wine cellar and opened a bunch of bottles of wine, and we smoked cigars, and I sat there and hung out with those guys and listened to their stories. And, it was just on a cloud. And after that night, I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Before that, I didn't really know that. I knew what I wanted to be in a kitchen, but I didn't know, like, the level. And that literally that night, I changed everything. And within, I think, less than a year, I was in the formal dining room. And under a year from that, I was a sous chef. And pretty quickly after that was chef de cuisine. So it just instantly, like, changed my whole perspective on
So it was a huge
everything.
launching pad for
It
you.
just, my brain went, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just,
Yeah.
you have to work harder, and you've got to read, and you've got to, study. And one of the big things that I learned from Chris was, and this sounds simple, but, you're in a pantry position and you want to be the guy that works fish. Well, come in 2 hours early every day and work with the fish guy. So when he quits or falls off his bike or whatever happens to him, I already know the job. I'm a shoe-in for that position, and then you tend to climb faster. But
smart.
It's you have to think of it that way and think of that every single day to do that. And if you don't realize that that's going to happen, like, well, chef, why didn't I get moved up? Why did you pick that other guy? He already knows the job. Because if I move one guy up, I have to train two. I'm training you and the guy that's replacing you. If I don't have to train you, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's a shoe-in to move that person up in that position.
Good tip for any of those
Absolutely.
learning
Yeah.
chefs listening in.
Learn the job that you want before you get it. Absolutely.
Well, and the way you're describing it, it sounds like you are happily falling from one stepping stone to another in terms of, not only learning new things, but actually progressing your career and advancing along. And the way you describe it, saying you didn't know exactly what you want to do, it sounds, I don't want to use the word luck because it's obviously not that, but that's where I'm going with this question is, what was pushing you through and what was kind of like a guiding light? Was it just your passion for cooking, or were you just having so much fun maybe?
The passion for cooking, and I look at that at two different things. One is the physical piece of it, and the other one is the knowledge behind it and understanding what you're doing. Learning how to make a reduction or sear a piece of fish properly is a physical task. Learning why that's happening, like the actual, why does the fish brown this way or not brown that way, and how do you do temps and control things? Those are kind of the two parts of cooking. I was really into the physical piece of it. What I would call banging pans, basically.
Okay.
Literally, the busier you were, the more pans you had going, the more action. That was what I was into. And learning how to do that faster and faster and faster. We would mess around and say, okay, when the ticket comes in for a fish and you've got 15 minutes to pick that up, I wouldn't sear the fish immediately. I'd literally wait till like the last minute to see how fast I could do it.
Yourself.
Exactly. How to get that speed and that momentum, going back to the egg thing, that was tradition back in the day. You worked at an egg restaurant or you learned how to flip eggs before you did anything else in the kitchen, including pantry or anything else, because it gave you timing and tempo and speed and ticket reading, because eggs are, there's a million ways to cook an egg. As you know, in a French toque, the folds on the hat are represented by how many ways you can cook an egg. I think there's like 180 or something like that.
Did not know
That's
that.
a French, super French thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you know how to cook eggs, and if you don't, then you really don't know anything.
Might as well go make
It's
chili.
such a basis of that cuisine specifically.
Yeah.
You don't like the Mission. We don't, we cook eggs, but it's not the same thing. You're not using them for sauces and as omelets. Making a French omelet is a technical thing.
Such
and doing
a timing
it properly.
issue, right?
It's timing. It's color. There's speed involved in it, and you can mess it up quickly. From a French chef's perspective. Right?
I think the egg is, as you were just describing, an interesting lens to kind of look at the difference between your average American cuisine of what I grew up eating. You think of, do you want scrambled eggs or do you want it fried? When there's a bunch of different ways to fry an egg. Whereas in French cuisine, especially more technical French cuisine, it's so diverse. Is there a specific way of cooking an egg that most Americans maybe never even experience?
The general kind of rule is to be gentle. I don't know if you remember, I don't even know if they still make them, and I just remember as a kid in the 70s and 80s, they had those like omelet pans, right? And you would put the eggs in there, and then that's how you flip it in half or whatever, and then bake it in the oven. They always came out brown and like burnt and just
Hard.
tasted off. It doesn't mean that you necessarily cook everything low and slow, but you don't mess with the egg too much. You don't have to beat the hell out of it, just respect the egg is really what it comes down to. Respect the yolk when you're flipping it, things like that. But, and the same can be said when you translate that to like a béarnaise sauce or something. That's not something you boil, right? There's a technique involved in that to get your emulsion proper and your balance of acidity and everything else. And the egg's just a huge piece of that. And it translates into a lot of other cuisine. There are eggs in Latin cuisine, but just not as prevalent as French.
Sure. So circling back to your storyline. So at this point, you're up and coming at Christopher's, right? It sounds like you guys began to develop a personal relationship outside of just the kitchen. Is that the case?
At that time, no. I mean, the outside of the kitchen we developed after a few years of me being there and me moving up into a more of a management position. Yes, because a chef goes into the kitchen and he may know every guy in there, every girl in there, every position, what they're doing, how long they've been there. You know all those things. But you don't typically directly communicate with them about real things. You may go over and kind of shoot the shit. Hey, how's it going? How's the baby? That kind of stuff. But typically you're going to go to your chef de cuisine or your sous chef to delegate anything that you're expecting from that person or anybody else in the kitchen. So those direct relationships really get stronger as somebody moves up in the kitchen, because otherwise you end up unintentionally so undermining your chef. So if I go over and tell the pantry person to do something, but I don't tell the chef that I've done that, and then the chef comes over and goes, "Why are you doing that?" and yells at them, and they're like, "The other chef told me to." It creates a lot of disinformation and confusion in the kitchen, which is why there's a kind of that classic brigade system in French. You've got a chef, you've got a sous chef, chef de cuisine, pantry chef, and then it goes down to fish, meat, pantry. I'm not using the French terms, but the basics of the hierarchy of the kitchen. Like a saucier is the lead position before going into a sous chef role. And so it has to, it's very in a military kind of way. You talk to the people at the top and they kind of delineate it down to everybody else behind them.
And so before things became more on a personal level, it does sound, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it sounds like he kind of took you under his wing, right? To tell you something along the lines of show up when the fish person shows up may sound to some like he's just giving you more work, but it sounds like that was a pretty instrumental
That's direction.
change.
I think the first interaction I had with Chris was probably in the very beginning, maybe 2 or 3 months after I had started. And he came over to my station. I was working the fish station in the bistro, and I had done something wrong. I don't know what it was. I'd burned a fish or overcooked something or done something. And so he came over and was giving me some grief about it. And then he kind of stopped and went, "Aren't you the guy that was from Paris?" And I went, "Yeah." And he's like, "Where'd you work?" And I'm like, "I don't want to tell any of the places I worked at." And then that was for the next 2 or 3 months. I was the guy from Paris that didn't really know as much as I had led on, kind of thing. And I definitely took some abuse for that. But when I was moving into more manager roles in that restaurant and under some other great sous chefs as well, is where the kind of the out of town travel, going and doing dinners in different cities, different states, where it's just Chris and I together. That's where there's more time to kind of communicate.
Sure.
Because in the kitchen, just think of it, if I was a line cook in the bistro and Chris was over, shooting the shit with me every day and not the other guys, there's animosity that gets created.
Absolutely.
So you don't really want to do that too deep. Or, "Hey, Matt, let's go have a drink after work," and he doesn't invite everybody else. Like, that would be a problem. So it's hard to develop those things. But as I moved up and the longer that I had been there and the more trips that he and I had done and events that we organized within the restaurant, we definitely developed a friendship, and that friendship has been going on since then.
And so where do things lead to next? Or were you at Christopher, working with Christopher for several more years after that point?
So I was there about 6.5 years total, and he and his partners were not in a good place. So the restaurant was looking like it was going to close. And I was contemplating moving to Los Angeles because I felt I had already been working at the best restaurant in Arizona. Where was I going to go? Anything I was going to do was most likely a down step. Not a lateral or an upward move, and obviously I wanted to continue to learn, and so Chris was doing a dinner for cystic fibrosis on the back lot of Paramount with basically every chef in LA that I would want to work for, and he called me and said, "Hey, you want to come out and work the event with me? I'll introduce you to some of these guys." So I went out there and met a few of these guys, talked to them, worked the event, and in that process, Thomas Keller was there. And he was doing his salmon canapé, and so Chris introduced me to him. I had eaten at the restaurant twice, I think, at that point. Obviously a huge fan at that point, but also knew that there were tons of guys and girls that wanted to go work in that restaurant. And he offered me a position and said, "Listen, I've got a guy that's leaving the poissonnier position," which in that kitchen was really the lead under the sous. and would you be interested? So I flew out the next week, did a stage with him, worked for 2 days. He hired me. I came back, loaded my car, and moved to Napa.
That's
incredible.
Great.
Yeah.
And this, I don't know if you've ever heard of the guy
there.
whose job I took, but his name was Grant Achatz. I don't know.
Oh,
if you've ever heard of
kidding.
him,
That's
No way.
he was the poissonier at the time. He left to go back to Chicago, and then
You're like, thanks, Grant.
about a year after I left, he came back and was the sous there before he went and started the
Oh,
rest
so you
of
got to
everything.
work with him also then?
Yeah, just for a few months. He trained me on poissonier before he left. Yeah.
And that sounds like it's kind of a seismic shift, not only in terms of, taking things to a different level or a new level, but also moving completely to a new state. Did it feel like, in a certain way, you were starting over new as you're taking that next step?
Just to be blunt, my initial piece, not learning things, because obviously I wanted to learn, and I knew I would learn different techniques and different ways to look at food there, just based off of kind of that prior experience where I'd seen other chefs and what they do and how they do it. But my real goal and kind of focus was, I thought that I was going to be going and competing against the best cooks in the country. I knew, he wasn't hiring guys that had worked at, the egg place for 6 months.
Yeah.
You had to have been coming from somewhere or someone that had given you, the seal of approval, i.e. Chris, to say this guy's talented and can work in your kitchen, because it was intense. Mm-hmm. And so that was my goal. And there were definitely a few guys there that I was like, okay, I got to run faster. I got to move quicker. I got to be smarter. Grant being definitely the number one out of all that, because he knew the systems there, and so I was watching what he was doing to keep up, because the Poissonnier station, that whole kitchen was it was intense. It was intense, and I had done intense formal dining, obviously with Chris. This was a different level. Just because of the way that Thomas did things, the way he organized things. It was fun. It was amazing. It was a great kitchen to work in. Still to this day, the hottest kitchen I've ever worked in. At the time, it's totally different now.
Yeah.
But they've changed that whole dining room and the whole space.
Well, what is that intensity like? Because you mentioned the heat. Is it a noisy kitchen? Is it the speed of things?
It's the speed of things. It's not a noisy kitchen. There's no the only noise is Thomas calling tickets to you, because you don't get a ticket, so it's all verbal. That was the biggest learning curve, because he's got his back to you, and you're trying to listen to what he's saying while you're doing what he's doing. So he's calling in a 5-course tasting menu, a 7-course tasting menu, a 12-course tasting menu, and on that menu, on a 5-course, I've got 2 fish, and so on. It goes higher and higher, and then you throw in a VIP, which is a curveball on that. So if it's a salmon course for the menu that you're only running that night, and there's a VIP, you saved mise en place from the salmon course you did the night before and the night before. And so now you've got to plate that salmon for a 6-top 3 different ways. So 2 people got the caviar with orange, 2 people got the basil sauce, 2 people got, so those were the curveballs. And so you pulled out your product as it called in, and you just lined it up. But you didn't know really, you didn't know what table it was on or anything else. So it was just pick up a salmon course on the 5-course tasting. So you know what that is. So you've got that going
and
as the orders are coming in.
you can't forget, because you have nothing to reference
No,
once he's
no,
called it out.
You pull it out, and you're referencing what's sitting there.
Wow.
And
I'm already lost.
Yeah.
I was like,
there's a juggle there for sure. There's
Word
a juggle
intense
there.
sounds like an understatement
Yeah.
after that
Yeah.
description.
Yeah.
And that is probably like 5 minutes in that kitchen, huh?
Yeah, that's just your first tickets that are coming in, right? Do that for 4 or 5 hours. You're already there for 4 or 5 hours prepping, and then you always cleaned up at the end of the night, and all the chefs got together, and you looked at your produce order and your fish order, and you made the menu for the next day, because you had to leave a list for the commis that worked in your station to prep, because he was going to be in at 5 a.m. And so he had to have a list of what you were going to be serving that night. So he'd start some of the sauces, juicing beets, and then I would come in and take the beet juice and reduce that down, etc. So yeah, it was intense. It was fun. I mean, again, this is where the egg thing comes in, because you're just replacing one item for another. I know that sounds oversimplified, but instead of getting a ticket for an over easy egg, you got a ticket for a salmon. If you try to look at it that way, it's a little easier to manage it, especially when you're changing fish every day that are different, from a skin-on fish to a butter poached lobster to a seared scallop. they're all different techniques, but they're all fish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every time we change the menu, I try to talk to my guys about that. Just think it's still a fish. It didn't change. You know, it's a little bit different, but there's not much to it, because you can overwhelm yourself with this, you know, anxiety or apprehension that you're doing something different. You're not. You're just cooking. I'll give you a story from my time there, which was super fun. It was interesting to watch Thomas, because he would butch with everybody during the day, but then he would go and he'd come back for service. And he never came on the line, except for one day. A new guy on the meat station was having some difficulty keeping up, and he came over and he kicked him off the station, had him stand there, and he cooked for like 2 hours, and he was talking the whole time. But what he was really talking about was, this is so easy. Why? I wish I could do this every day, but I got to be over there telling you what to do. I wish I was here. I wish
and the new guy was standing there.
He just had to stand there and watch, and it was
learning lesson.
That is way more intense than being yelled at. I can tell you that. And he'd never yelled at me, because he just wasn't that guy. But he would come over and he's a tall guy, and he would stand behind you and just kind of whisper in your ear more than anything. Do you know where you are? Yes, chef. You're at the French Laundry. Yes, chef. Do you know what that means? Yes, chef. Okay. And that was all he had to say. You know, it was like, you take that to heart. Like, okay, I get it. I know exactly what you're saying without saying it. I'm screwing up. I'm behind, or whatever it is that's happening. But it was a good run there. I wasn't there as long as I wanted to be. I had some family issues and I needed to come home, which really was an odd time here in Phoenix, because I came back. Christopher hadn't opened his new space yet. I just left, again, to me, the best restaurant in the country. Coming back to Phoenix, my only place that I really thought that I might find that challenge was at Mary Lane's. And literally the day I came back is the day that he left Mary Lane's to go open Strata's or is it Alex?
Oh,
Alex,
that
correct.
same day.
Yeah, that he went to Vegas, and so there was you know, that they didn't know who the new chef was going to be. You know, I worked there for maybe a month or two, and it just wasn't the right fit for me. But you know, at that point, half the chefs in California were going to Vegas as well. That was like the big opening of the culinary scene in Vegas.
When was this approximately?
So this is 99, 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so at this point, you've gone from working in a kitchen, just kind of bouncing around doing different stuff, not necessarily having a passion from it, for the food at this point when you're very young, right? You bounce around, do a few different things, and you find yourself back in restaurants, still not knowing that the culinary side is really the direction you want to go, and that kind of evolves over time. But you mentioned before that you weren't specifically trying to soak up just, you know, stuff about cooking specifically. You were kind of gathering information about how you operate in a restaurant. As you go through these different cycles and evolutions of your career, I would assume that you're soaking up a lot more beyond just the cooking side of it. Is that the case?
It definitively changes over into strictly food specific, understanding what the actual product is, provenance of the product, why this scallop is different from that scallop. You know, trying to understand flavor combinations, working with salt, acidity, you know, fats, all those things that you know, really breaking it down on a more granular level. So right before, it's this big picture, and then it starts to get really, really
You're
small.
focusing in.
Yeah.
When
Correct.
did you start thinking, I want to open my own place?
I think that was always on my mind. The question was, what type of restaurant did I want that to be? And when I say type, it was probably French more than anything at the time. But did I want it to be more of a casual bistro? Did I want it to be a you know, white tablecloth, you know, tasting menu type space? Did I want it to be large or small? You know, and I didn't really know that really at the time. I had all those thoughts in my head. I'd looked at a few spaces around there thinking I wanted to do something closer to a white tablecloth kind of French Laundry style restaurant. But the reality is I never really wanted to open that restaurant. I liked cooking in that restaurant. I love eating at those restaurants. I didn't think that was something that I wanted to do on a day-to-day basis for multiple reasons. Not that you lose heart and soul in there, because that's just simply not true, even though I think it has a little bit of that aspect of being a little antiseptic. But I wanted to be able to cook different things. I wanted that openness, and I feel like there's a kind of and that's changed a little bit as well in the last 20 years, but there's a little rigidity to the formula for that restaurant, where, you know, like a bistro is a little more open. You know, I want to add some lemongrass to my veal sauce. It's not outside of the bounds, you know, where I felt like at the time it was. I think that's changed a ton since then. I think tons of people are doing, I won't say the dreaded word, we'll call it crossover food, where things come over, but and having fun with food in general, and just understanding like how many products are out there. That I still, that's the beauty of this business. I still learn something, whether it's on the business side, the culinary side, the you know, physically how you're cooking it side. You know, there's just so many facets and so many ingredients that you bump into. I'm like, oh wow, I've never heard of that before. I'll see how I can incorporate that into a dish or into a sauce or into a drink or something else, and it never stops. Just when you think you know.
I've been hearing that a lot from food and beverage. I feel like it's come a lot in the last, I don't know, over the last couple of weeks in podcasts that we do, are people liking the chaos of food and beverage. Like, that's what draws them in. They're like, we love that it's something new every day, that we're meeting new people and new ingredients, and each day is it's not the same as the last.
Definitely not a monotonous. Yeah. There are parts of it that are.
Sure.
Which are usually the bad parts, but...
well, those are just systems, though, right?
Correct. Those seem like the bad part, or the monotonous parts, because you don't want to do them, right?
Yeah. That's why you systemize them and then just go through the motions, get them done, right?
You wish, right?
So you arrived back in Phoenix, and you said you were at Mary Lane's for how long?
Maybe 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
While they were kind of waiting out, you know, honestly, I was waiting to see if there was a sous chef position open. Mm-hmm. Really, you know, I tell this to most of my cooks that, you know, always make a side or forward move. You know, doing a back step, going to a lesser position in a restaurant, even if you're making another $1 an hour, is not benefiting your career. Mm-hmm. You always lateral or up, if that's your goal. You know, there's other reasons to be in the business besides that, but in my view, that's what you should do. So I went to Mary Lane's thinking this is my only quote unquote lateral or forward direction. And when I realized that this wasn't going to be the spot and wasn't going to work out, you know, I went through probably my cooking midlife crisis. And, you know, I went to work at Arcadia Farms for Carolyn. She was a good friend. It's kind of a part-time thing just to, you know, put some money in the bank. And to be honest with you, I decided I was going to quit.
Get out of the business.
I was going to get out of the business.
Boy,
I was going to go to
We would have lost a big talent there.
Yeah, I was going to go to ASU. I signed up for classes on computer science. I'm like, all right, this is the thing that's happening now, right? I'm not good at math, but I'll figure it out. Yeah. I'm a slow learner, but when I get it, then I got it. So I figured I could do that. And so I called Michael DiMaria, who I'd worked for. So while I worked for Christopher during that time, I worked for multiple other people. I had 2 jobs for a good chunk of that until I was chef de cuisine, and I couldn't do 2 jobs anymore. But I worked at the Ritz-Carlton as a banquet chef. I worked for Roxanne for about a year as a lead line cook. I was going to be a sous chef there. That didn't pan out. I helped open lawns at the Hermosa with Patrick Poblete. For any old culinary people, I haven't seen him in a while, but he was a big name back then. And Michael and Brandon had just moved back to Phoenix. And we're reopening lawns. So this is maybe 95 or something like that. So I had a relationship with Michael and Brandon. And they had Michael's at the Citadel at the time up in Pinnacle Peak and Pima.
We actually just spent time with Jay Bugzinski,
who
worked with Michael DiMaria.
Mm-hmm. Well, he worked for Michael. He worked for me at Zinc.
He's up in Sedona now overseeing some restaurants.
Is he?
Up there.
Well, and he's got his chicken shops, right?
It is phenomenal.
I haven't been.
What's he
Sorry,
have?
Jay.
He opened a hot chicken place called
Jaybirds.
Jaybirds, and it is phenomenal.
This is up where?
Sedona.
Okay, nice.
You know, he's taken all his fine dining and parlayed that into making the best hot chicken. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, when he was digging into how he makes all the different spice blends and where they all end up and all that, it was like, you know, I've had hot chicken before. I don't know that I've ever had it on that level. So circling back to you, at this point, when you're kind of deciding what you want to do next, what draws you back into food and beverage, and where do things go from there?
I mean, pretty simply, I called Michael, said I just need a job like 3 or 4 days a week. And again, I just needed some cash while I was going to school. He said, great, and so I started working for him up at the Citadel. And again, about 4 or 5 months into that, I'm like, what am I doing? I don't want to be in a classroom. Not that computer science wasn't for me. I felt like I connected somewhere in that level, even though I barely got into it. And I went to Michael and said, I'm putting in my notice. I'm a chef and I need to be a sous chef. I like managing as well as cooking. And he said, well, perfect, because our executive chef is leaving because they were opening a new restaurant in downtown Phoenix in the old Eddie Matney space. And so he's like, do you want to be the executive chef? And I was like, yeah, perfect. So I took the position, pissed off a couple of guys that were my new sous chefs because I just frog leaped over them. But I knew all of them prior to the restaurant. We were friends, and I think the respect was there. But, we had a great team at that time. Jay was there. Tammy Coe was our pastry chef.
Oh, really?
Adam Shop, who eventually went and helped me open Zinc, was one of my sous chefs. Jason Merrill, Scott Liberty, Patrick Fagan, who's a super talented chef. So we had a good team up there, and it was a great couple of years. And near the end, I was looking to move on again. Didn't really know what I wanted, but just knew that I was kind of done in that space.
Were you getting frustrated? Because I feel like I've kind of had the same path. Like, at least you stayed in the industry,
right?
Like, of just like, all right, I'm doing a really good job at knocking all the stuff off that I know I don't like. Right. Was there anything where you were just kind of like frustrated, you weren't finding a more clear path? Or
I didn't know. I mean, the reality was I wanted to open a restaurant, and I knew, not that working for Michael was bad. That was not moving me towards that position.
Yeah.
They were moving towards more of a catering company. That's when they started, basically, which evolved into who they are now, which is the largest company on the West Coast that does everything from the Phoenix Open to, if there's a fire on the West Coast, they're feeding those firefighters. They're big, and that's, they opened, I think, Heirloom after Michael's and stuff. But at the time, they weren't really looking to open more concepts, and I wanted more diversity in food. I wanted more control. I wanted my own space, and so this is where timing comes back, right? While I was at Christopher's, Terry Ellisor, who's my future partner, opened the Merc Bar on 24th Street in Camelback. And I used to go to the Merc Bar. He used to come to Christopher's. We were friendly, not friends or anything like that. But he, at that point, approached Michael and Brandon and said, I want to open a French bistro. This is my dream. He had spent some time in France. He was from New York. Was good friends with Keith McNally, had seen Balthazar and some of his other restaurants, and really that was his passion, was to open a French bistro. But he'd never been in the restaurant business; he had only been in the bar business, and so he hired those two to consult. And they were like, "Well, the first thing you need is a chef, and we got a guy right here." It's kind of like
of
this.
all things, a French bistro,
right?
Yeah.
Just this perfect timing, right? I don't know if that's serendipity because I don't fully grasp the definition of that, but I think it's close to it, about as close as you get. And so, in 2002, we opened Zinc Bistro, January 10th.
And so you had not really been involved in the business side before, like you said. You were very focused in on food specifically. So what is that pivot like in your life? Is there a big mental adjustment that you have to make, or are you kind of still focused on food at this point in the formation of Zinc?
So, where I was before on the management side was food, but it was also labor and all the things that a chef de cuisine or a kitchen chef needs to know on how to order food, how to cost menus, how to staff properly, how to pay your staff, how to run a P&L on the kitchen side of it. The business side I hadn't had any form or practice in. So building Zinc was a huge learning curve on that side, but the reality was that was Terry. He managed the restaurant. This is where he and I have been, we're partners for 20 years. He stayed in his lane. I stayed in my lane. I did food. I did the costing of all that. I managed everything. I did some front of the house stuff. I still pick out the plates, silver, glassware, the basic service side of it. Because if the food touches it, that's basically my realm is the way that I look at it. So whether or not we, paid for our liquor license that year, I didn't think about that. That was Terry's job, which is a whole other side of the business, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, over years, I've learned some of those things, but I always joke, or Terry and I always joke that over 20 years we've been in 2 fights. And the second fight was whether or not we actually had the first fight. Yeah. So we had a great relationship, and really, ran with that and moved that ball forward.
And
so
Zinc is so beloved. I mean, there's. If I mention Zinc, everybody has a story about the first time they had, your moule frites or the onion soup. Everybody, when I first moved here, you have to get the onion soup at Zinc Bistro. And it's just such a lovely atmosphere. Your team's great. There's a beautiful patio. The design, it's one of my favorites.
I love Zinc. Obviously, it's my first baby. And 20 years on now, it's still, that restaurant is held up. It still looks good. It's still, we're still producing all the things that we wanted to produce. And, from the beginning, that was just stick with the classics, right? Do the steak frit, do the moule frit, do the pate and the onion soup. But we always left some room there to experiment and have fun. We run fish features pretty much every day. We try to do European fish on Fridays. We kind of switched over that to classic French Fridays the last year or so. But, there's always a challenge. And that kitchen is not the largest. And when you're doing 400 lunches and 400 dinners, it can push on you a little bit. It's definitely a pressure cooker for the size that it is, and for what we do, because we really make everything there.
And I've seen the kitchen.
Cliche,
it's in relation to how big the restaurant, and then the patios, and then the kitchen. It's bravo.
It's you want to learn. You want to learn speed and tempo. Work there for a year, you'll get it all.
Yeah,
I get it all.
And so Zinc is in Kierland, correct?
Correct.
So back when you first opened that, that's actually around the time when I moved to Arizona. I'm like 3 years old. I'm not going to French restaurants at this point in my life yet. But I do have memories of, Scottsdale Quarter was just a giant dirt pile at that point. What is the landscape like, both visually, how things changed since then, but also in terms of food and beverage and what is available at that time?
In that area specifically?
And more broadly across Arizona.
I mean, that area specifically, when we signed the lease for Zinc, I would tell you that there wasn't one restaurateur, wine purveyor, anybody in the biz that told us that we were out of our freaking minds. Because there was nothing going on up there. I mean, that's another 2 miles north past the 101. That's where I did kegers in high school. Yeah. I mean, this was the woods. And like you said, the quarter across the street, that was Dial Corporation for 30 years before that. And then they bulldozed and it sat there empty. The West End at Kierland that's there now, that didn't open for almost 3 years after Zinc was open. So that complex was not fully realized in the beginning, that where all the condos and everything are south of us, north of Zinc, that was a flat dirt lot. Everything south of us was a dirt lot for years, and eventually, grew up. But so watching it grow and change is quite incredible, especially now with so many more people living in the area between Optima and all the apartments and homes and everything. That space has just expanded greatly. And there was a period of time before 2008 that everything seemed like it was going north Scottsdale, like everybody was going to go past the 101 up there. You had City North going, like everybody was going this way, trying to think DC Ranch,
Sure, yeah.
And then after 2008, everybody kind of reverted inwards, and this is where you see the quarter come up and everything else, and all the condos and everything else kind of spring up there. So it's really turned into its own little epicenter in Kierland, which is crazy to look at. We did a little memorial this last summer, and all these people brought all these old pictures, and it's so weird to look at Zinc when it was a dirt lot on the side of it, and you could see why people were like, you're out of your mind opening a restaurant up there. And it was for the first year and a half. I mean, it was me, my sous chef, and we had a couple of cooks. That was it, but we were doing, we did 80 covers tonight. Woo! It was like every day was breaking records, and then suddenly you're doing 400. You're like, wait a second, slow down.
Yeah.
This wasn't built to do that, right? How do you evolve from that? But, strictly from a culinary scene, you mean, in like Arizona from then to now, is that?
Yeah, because I'm trying to get a sense of the generational evolution of Arizona food and beverage from your perspective, because, it's an interesting happenstance, if that word is applicable, for Dom to now just be maybe 2 minutes up the road, maybe a 5-minute walk. I don't know exactly what it is, but someone who worked at Zinc Bistro And now, for a long time, Zinc was like the only restaurant, it sounds like. And then some more came in, but not necessarily entirely local. You got Oso 10 minutes up the road. I don't know exactly when they came into that spot. Four Peaks was there for a while. So over the next few years, maybe till like 2008-ish time, how had things evolved? Because I want to get your perspective as well on what came next.
Yeah. Again, the area seemed like it grew out and it came back in. Like you look at where Oso is, it was Four Peaks. You're right. That complex, before I moved to Napa back then, that complex was being built and was kind of the new area. Mm-hmm. I was working with a group to possibly open an Italian restaurant there.
Really?
That's obviously way back. But, then when they came in 01, 02 and built the 101, mm-hmm. that whole corner just got totally changed. Mm. I'm not saying it went in a bad direction. It just went in a different direction. There was supposed to be a little bit more of a high-end complex, and because of that, the freeway it killed a lot of spaces. Got just destroyed out of that. I think it was the original Earl's in town, which is now Twin Peaks, and Earl's was like, kicking ass up there when they opened, and then once they built the freeway, it just killed their business. So
that's too bad.
Interesting.
So expansion can help or it can hurt, and just depending on when and where it happens. But from a culinary standpoint, like I think that this town has changed a lot, and Dom's a great example of it. My last executive chef at Zinc, Dave Bowman's Aftermath is one of those spaces as well.
And they just opened Aftermath.
Yeah,
right?
they were supposed to be today, I think. I think.
And for listeners, they're talking about Dom Ruggiero at Hush.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Who used to work with Matt.
And he mentioned that he worked with Charlene for a while as well. What was she doing around that time, if you recall?
I don't know specifically. I know at some point she worked for Krissa Kaufman over here at Rancho Pino. I don't know if that was the time frame or not. Mm-hmm. I mean, Krissa, she's closed now over at Rancho Pino, but she's probably the longest, most accomplished chef here in this town. I think she opened Rancho Pino in '94 and just closed this last year. I mean, she would have been kind of alluding to where I'm going with this. One of the first people to do this, and what I'm alluding to is, during the 90s and even into the 2000s, it wasn't that we didn't have great chefs or great restaurants. We did, but they were all large. They're like this or like Zinc, fairly big, and you didn't have what you see in San Francisco, LA, New York, Chicago, which are these smaller, like shotgun restaurants with 40 seats, and you can see the chef, and there's some, you're really more personal, I guess, is kind of where I'm going with it. And again, with Hush and Aftermath and what she did there, and F&B, and some of these smaller, like more focused restaurants where I can name 50 in those other cities. Literally, I could write them down for you probably right now. That I always looked at them like, that's great, right? I would love to do an animal here, right? And if I took that though to my partners, they'd be like, why? Why would you open a 2,500 square foot space when at minimum it's 6,000 square feet to be a successful restaurant in Scottsdale? That was just the general rule. And you'll still see large restaurants open because that's what most people in the business here are looking to go big. And there's a lot that goes into that, right? Is part of that because of our extreme variances in weather and guest counts. Basically, which means 6 months out of the year, make your bank. You want to have as many tables as you can. You want to be open for as many hours as you can, because we know, June 15th to October 1st, you're losing money. I mean, that's just maybe not always, but you're not making money. You're not paying for it. So you got to basically store your nuts over the winter. And so why wouldn't you maximize that space? So I see both sides of it, but I've thought we've always missed that I don't know what I call it a shotgun restaurant, but again, that animal type restaurant, the Au Cheval in Chicago. I mean, there's just a ton. Estella in New York. That just felt more personal. And so I'm loving that these guys are doing that. And I hope to someday do something similar, not those concepts, but something like that.
Well, and that was
I don't doubt you will either.
That was one of the interesting tidbits I was hoping for, because we've talked with several people, but not many that have been as focused in Arizona for as long as you have. So Christina, when you come around in around 08, I believe we've chatted about it before. you had not really been to Arizona all that much, had you?
We'd come out for visits. Like, for
Okay.
instance, Michael's at the Citadel is the one that opened my eyes to, wow, there's some great food being made here. And so, you know, I knew that there were little pockets. And so that's why the very first month we moved here, I had read about James doing a locavore dinner at Topino. And so I feel really lucky that I went and dived into the scene, because that very first night I met people like Kent Callaghan, because he was pouring wine, and you know, Pillsbury and Dos Cabezas and chefs, and Julie Murphy of the, you know, Farm Bureau. So I got to see all these people and meet them firsthand, and so I never had that mentality like, oh, there's no good food here, or oh, it's not Boston. I never subscribed to that theory of comparing. I don't understand why that actually. That's
why we love you,
is
Christine.
popular.
Well,
But,
so
I really, you know, searched out places and searched out chefs and searched out things that were being done, and I was never disappointed.
So to make you compare them without competing them, I guess, if you will, did you have a very different perspective of the two food scenes? Because, I mean, it sounds like to go to a dinner and you've got all sorts of different local winemakers there pouring wine. That, I don't know if that's something that happens on the East Coast, but it sounds like a pretty unique experience in and of itself.
I mean, Boston doesn't have the local agriculture scene that Phoenix does. Okay. And that was an eye-opener, because me, like a lot of people, I didn't know that Phoenix was so, you know, had such a vibrant community. I thought things didn't grow, you know, things were sourced in.
Old West, tumbleweeds.
Right. So
and,
that was a big difference that I really loved. That I remember I went to J&G and was eating, you know, tomatoes grown, and I thought it was because J&G was so fancy that they could get these local tomatoes. And then I went to another restaurant and found out, oh, this is Phoenix. You can eat these, you know, tomatoes in December. So.
Well, and for anyone looking to dig into that side of things more, because I think it still is a little bit not as understood or clearly defined to people as they would realize, at least from the wine perspective, check out a wonderful book called, Christina, do you know the name of that book?
It's called Arizona Wine, A History of Perseverance and Passion.
Yes, wonderfully written.
And I should mention my Phoenix Cooks book, because Matt is featured in that.
Yes. A couple of good recipes
For
in
the
there.
mission, with one of my favorite dishes. That we should probably talk about the mission now.
But that's a wonderful segue, because I met with Abel from Mezcal Carreño recently. It was a couple months ago, and I'm walking in at the mission to sit down and chat with him, and right up front is your beautiful book, Christina, featuring you, Chef. And so this is at the mission, which is essentially catty corner to Zinc Bistro. Kind of walk us through what happened there, if you will.
So I'll do that, but I want to backtrack 1 second
Sure.
on the local produce and everything else, and because that has changed a lot as well in the last 25 years. So if you go back to, I'll just pick 95 because it's a kind of a mid number there. A lot of those things didn't exist, right? Or at least more of the high-end, more obscure products.
I remember Barbara Fenzel telling me that she couldn't even find romaine lettuce at the stores. It was just iceberg.
Oh, wow.
It really, really was. And you had a few people like, was it Steele and Company? I think it was Barbara Steele. I can't remember her first name, who was starting to grow like basil and a few other things, but not a lot out there. I mean, at Christopher's specifically, if I wanted nice product, which we did, I ordered that directly from Los Angeles and had to put it on my meat truck to come and be delivered. Or if I ordered it from like Chef's Garden in Ohio or any other number of farms or places, we put it on a plane. But there was no FedEx. There was no DHL. That didn't exist. So we had a van, and we had to go down to the airport, and you had to be there when the shipment dropped. Otherwise, because they didn't have any coolers. So my fish, my turbo, and all my European fish that I ordered on Monday and came every Thursday, if I wasn't there at the dock to pick it up, and it was the middle of summer, there was no shade. They just threw it on the tarmac.
Wow.
We had to go pick it up, and so we got produce deliveries. We got vinegar and honey and things that you just couldn't get locally here, even from the big box guys like Cisco. Or I don't think it was Shamrock at the time. I think it was Rykoff Sexton. So it was a totally different world, and that you would never want to go back to that because it was difficult. But that was a reality across the country as well. There, even in a place like Napa, those things were just happening. with people, working with small farmers and mushroom purveyors and, all those things that I almost think everybody kind of takes for granted now.
True.
You just didn't have that back then. It just the infrastructure wasn't built. It's not that chefs didn't want that product. Every chef wanted to be like the guy in France that walked into his garden and pulled a carrot out and took it inside and peeled it up, cut it in oblique, and sautéed that with a little bit of butter and spooned that onto a plate. We just didn't have that, right? And there are so many products that grow great here. So just wanted to show that piece of it.
That's a good point.
Absolutely.
Because it actually shows for chefs who were making a mark back then the challenge that was.
Huge challenge.
And this is before you can just hop on the internet. Not even to put it in the perspective now of I don't know exactly what the process is like, but however you're browsing through a catalog, even the information of what is available is so much more condensed. Whereas then it just simply wasn't available unless you jump through many, many hoops. So, yeah, very interesting piece to add there. Thank you for that note.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of bounced around a little bit. What are the different concepts that you're involved with across the board? And then we can kind of get back in the chronological unfolding of all these different places.
Mission, Old Town Scottsdale, Fat Ox here, and Mission in Kierland.
Okay.
We also have a Zinc at the airport. Zinc Brasserie at the airport.
Okay.
And I've actually eaten there, and it was fantastic.
Get the omelet.
Oh, okay. Now we know, right?
It seems like anything that should be tried at your place. If there's an egg dish, go for that, right? That's a recurring theme.
Yeah.
It's really not about my version of that omelet or anything. It's one of the guys that works there that's been there since the day we opened the airport, which is going on like 7 years now.
Wow.
And I think he's probably made 90% of the omelets. And he's super talented and an older gentleman who's really, really nice.
He's perfected it.
Yeah, he's good at it. Nice. And so it's like anybody that asks me, I'm like, there's other great stuff on the menu, but get the omelet. Because I like omelets at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I'm an equal opportunity.
We like those kind of tips, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I don't want anyone to poach your omelet guy, if I can make that one. But can you mention his name so we can give him a shout out?
I don't want to do that because I'd want to talk to him first.
Okay, sounds good.
He's a very kind of shy guy. So.
Okay, totally okay. So
awesome.
We can honor him by ordering the omelet.
There you go. Give him a nod, right?
So let's jump into the mission a little bit. I'll let you kind of differentiate the two concepts as you explain them, but where does the mission come from?
So mission, it's from an old granular level, kind of starts in the same place that Fat Ox does. So we're in New York doing a dinner out there. I'm not positive what it was for. It wasn't a beer dinner. It was for something else. And there's a chef out there with a new restaurant called Patria, and his name was Douglas Rodriguez. And I went to eat there. And obviously I'm born and raised here, whole life, love, quote unquote, air quotes, Mexican food. But all I knew was what we see here typically, which is Sonoran Mexican food, right? Beans, burritos, flour tortillas, cheese crisps, enchiladas, which I love, and can tell you which ones I like at which places, everything else. But that's all I knew. I didn't know anything beyond that. And so we go to his restaurant and we're having, 4 different Peruvian ceviches, all these other dishes, empanadas, just kind of things from Latin America that I just had no idea, never been on my radar, never saw it. Never even thought about looking for it. So we at his restaurant, I walked away just kind of like, stars in my eyes, like, well, that's really, really cool. There's always an angle too, right? Like you go and eat something like that and you come back to Phoenix, you're like, I want to go get that now, but there's no place here to do it. 905, that restaurant was specifically based off of me going to New York and eating Malaysian food and ramen at Apudo and all these places, and I'm like,
I wish I was here for that. Darn it!
Yeah, you just couldn't get that here. Twice fried Korean chicken. I'm like, I want that food. So that restaurant came out of that. But the mission that was the beginning of that thought process. But the real start was again Douglas Rodriguez again. This is 2003 or 4. They opened the Westin. He's the chef at Deseo. It's his menu. He's doing a lot of the stuff. Not a lot of the Patria stuff is a little bit less dynamic, but still really, really good. And he asked me to come over to do tastings before they opened. So we went over there and ate food, checked out all his stuff. He wanted real feedback on, how everything was. And so the next day he does their little opening for VIPs or whatever. And he's got a caja china out on the deck of the Westin and he's roasting a whole pig. And I'm like, what is that? That is super, super
It's
cool.
like a big wooden box where that you cook the whole pig in.
When I was at Michael's, so 3 or 4 years prior, we were doing a beer dinner here at, I'm going to forget his last name, James. He had Hapa over here in the Hilton Village. Got a ton of press. Another kind of Rancho Pino Hush, small place. He was doing like Hapa means half in Japanese, and he was half, I guess. But the food was like French and with this Asian, it was like licorice and soy glazed squab and stuff like that. He was doing some really cool stuff. So we did the after dinner over there, and Douglas was there for that, and we sous vide a whole pig up at Michael's, and then roasted it in the oven with a quince puree and all this other stuff, and brought it down there. So this is 99, 2000, and brought it to the space, and there's Douglas there, and I didn't know he was going to be there, and I'd met him a couple years before at Patria. And he was geeking out on the pork and the whole pig and everything, and we just had a great time. Fast forward a couple of years, he's roasting this pig in this box. I'm like, what is that? And at the time, he had some kind of I don't know if he was a partner in the company or something. He had some affiliation with him. So a week goes by, and Caja China shows up at the back door of Zinc. And he had sent me one. And I was like, oh my God,
nice.
This is awesome. So I just started roasting pigs like mad. So it's your birthday? Okay, I'm coming over. I'm going to bring a pig. We're going to roast a pig. Literally, I cooked probably 150 plus pigs in that over a couple of years.
Wow. Really?
Where I was doing them once a week, and just for fun. I really wanted to perfect it, but I also love pork, and I love roasting whole pigs. And if you haven't had a pig coming out of the Cocina, it's unique.
Well, I've got a birthday coming
there
up.
you go.
I just had one.
There you go. So, and typically when we would do these pigs, we would typically do, tortillas or salsa or something like that. We'd mix it up a little bit and do other things. I'm doing one that's not in the Caja China, but I'm doing a pork on Sunday. We're doing Hawaiian pizzas at the house, but I was just in Hawaii, and I love Hawaiian pizza. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but there's something about smoky ham and the acidity of pineapple and the sweetness that are a magic fit. But so my partner Terry and I, he started saying we should open just a taco shop that just serves pork tacos like this, because they were really, really good, super simple. And that's where my partner Brian came in. He had worked for Terry at the Merc Bar, and he wanted to be involved. And so the three of us just kind of started looking around for a space. We'd kind of come up with a basic concept. We're going to do pork tacos. I had been traveling a lot down to Mexico City. I love the street taco down there, the smaller size, a little more individual, less tortilla, a little more focused on the proper balance between a tortilla, the protein, the sauce, and garnish on it. And I hadn't seen anybody do that here in the state. So that was my focus, was just to do that. We eventually found the space. We had already picked the name Mission. We just ended up being next to a Mission church in Old Town. And as we started building it, the menu just kind of started growing. I'm like, all right, well, yeah, they were designing it way nicer than a taco shop. And so I'm like, well, we need to expand this a little bit. So this is where a lot of the dishes started going into Peru and down into South America, Buenos Aires, with steaks and bone marrow and sweetbreads, things like that. So we decided on a basic level, because one of the first names we had was Armada, that anywhere the Spanish Armada had gone, we could use some of that food. And we decided that we were going to basically do Central Mexico South for the most part. We weren't going to do the enchiladas, the Sonoran stuff, because they're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Even at the Mission Old Town, there's Los Olivos, been there for 30 years right next to us. Cienagaves, there's that style of food all around us. And so the goal was just to not do any of those things, again, I eat these things somewhere else. I want to be able to have somebody else enjoy this food. So
the pork component comes from the Spanish, right? That's how pork made its way over here, if I'm not mistaken?
I think there was some version of a wild pig here in the U.S. I don't think it was domesticated the way they did in Europe, but it's probably, yeah, especially down in Latin America. I'm not sure if they had them down there.
Okay, so take us where things go next. How long was it to actually open the spot?
So that was probably 2 or 3 years from the beginning of let's do a pork taco place. And in between that, a lot of other things happened as well. I was actually looking to do, before we got that concept off the ground, I had gone in a different direction and was going to do a pork taco place in downtown Phoenix. Because at the time it was, Phoenix is coming back. We're going to, downtown's going to be downtown again, where my whole life it was like downtown was not, right?
Yeah.
People went to the basketball game, and then they went home, and they didn't stay down there. And it wasn't a lot of residential where that changed, right? ASU campus was opening, all this was happening. So I was going to open this space. The landlord called me and said, I've got a space next door that's already kind of built around the 905 concept. So I started doing 905, and then a couple months later we opened Mission, and then '08 happened and kind of blasted everything. So and 905 and the taco concept that never existed just went away. I'm still paying for it, but anyways, that's what happens. So you take a risk. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Where my Mission group, we were a little more stable, not only financially but with the landlord and everything else, and so we were able to survive that first year and a half at the restaurant, which were tough. I mean, every day is like, do we close? Do we close? Do we go to 5 days a week? Or do we close for lunch? How do you minimize staff? All the things that are constantly in every restaurant, no matter what, happening. But that one was a little more intense. And honestly, I believe it was a singular write-up. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, from Phoenix Magazine, and she wrote an article about the Mission. It was all very good, but the dish was the almejas. It's still nobody orders, but for whatever reason, everybody loves.
It's a sleeper, and I can't figure it out
sleeper.
because you take one bite of that, and you'll want to order it every single
What is it?
It's almejas al vapor, which is just steamed clams in Spanish, but it's based off of a Peruvian dish called chupa de camarón, which is a shrimp dish with ají amarillo, sweetened condensed milk, sometimes potatoes, sometimes egg. We kind of threw in a French piece of that on the way that we steam the clams with white wine and citrus, and then we kind of threw in a Spanish paella piece to that with chorizo, and adding a few other. There's like 30 ingredients, and it's a fish stew. It's a Peruvian fish stew, basically. But she wrote that she wanted to take a bath in it.
I want it right
Really?
now.
She said she wanted to take a bath in it, and honestly, from there on, we kind of cleared the hurdle. But '08 was big. I mean, that was a shock to everybody.
We moved that year. I remember.
That was a big deal. So we survived it. I survived 9/11, opening Zinc, and we were supposed to open in October of 2001, and then lost half of our investors from 9/11, and then we opened in January. So been through a couple of hurdles. COVID's been different than all of those for sure. But
and then your original Mission did so well, you opened the second one in Kierland.
Correct.
And it's three times the size?
It's probably closer to like 35 or 40% larger. Okay. So it seems like it because it's 2 stories and it's voluminous in that room.
Right. Yeah.
The actual amount of seats are I think there's maybe 40 extra seats, 50 extra seats. But that restaurant was built also on the second floor to do private parties, just like this room that we're in now.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, and if you have not seen it at Kierland, I've not been to the Old Town one before, but I remember just randomly one time walking by, and this was long before I was very into food and beverage, and just going, that place looks awesome. Yeah. That is like beautiful. And then when I went in recently, it's a stunning spot. It's a place
it really
you have
is gorgeous.
to go.
And the other Mission is totally different. The other Mission, you feel like you're in, maybe the Caribbean in an old Spanish kind of like pirate kind of thing. It's darker, a lot of candles.
More rustic.
The salt brick wall that goes around the kitchen kind of lights up this warm amber across the room. And we have the salt brick up there as well,
I would say.
Yeah. But totally different vibes. People that only have been to Old Town and then go up to Kierland, they're like, the food was different. I'm like, it's the same.
Yeah, everybody has their favorite.
And I'm like, it's the environment changes everything. They're like, we prefer Old Town. And people that do the opposite are like, we really like Kierland. It's too dark down there. So I get it. Yeah. And food does taste different in different environments, right?
True.
Sure.
Right.
An oyster on the Champs-Elysees is going to taste
right.
different than Kierland. It's going to be better there.
Well, yeah, I remember eating my food and just looking around, and I'm like, it feels like fine dining Mexican food just because of how elevated the experience is by where you're at, but it's also got that casual component to it and just food on such a high level. If you've not been there, you have to go. Crazy mezcal list as well. So
the Mission Pisco is or they call it a Mission Sour is my favorite.
Ooh, okay. See, another good tip.
It's like a Pisco Sour, but with mezcal.
Yeah, the cocktails there, I had one of those as well. Incredible stuff. So now I think I know where I'm going for dinner tonight. So before you opened at Kierland, you had opened where we are currently, the Fat Ox, correct?
Correct. So Fat Ox was about 2 years in the making before like opening day, from finding the space, working with the landlord, getting designs up and running. We had a great team, husband and wife, Ben and Anissa. She's the designer, he's the architect, that did this restaurant and Mission Carolyn. And I think it was in May, I'm not going to be straight on the year, so this is maybe 5 years ago. The May before we opened this restaurant in October, so we're just 5 years here in the last couple of weeks. That May is when that space came available for Mission Carolyn. And then we opened Mission Carolyn the following February. So that was a quick, super stressful, well thought out turnaround. I say that looking back on it still, like,
how did I do that?
If I could have waited another year to do it, right? No, my partners and I, that following spring is where season's kind of winding down. I'm like, I have PTSD. I don't know what it is, but I got it. Like I'm burnt and tired and can't think straight, and just opening 2 restaurants basically at the same time was not fun. And with the best support staff that I couldn't have had it better. I mean, before we opened this restaurant it was mid-July maybe, a girl that worked for me at Zinc for 9 years, Rochelle Daniel, had gone up to Sedona, was a chef up there, and then she had decided that she wanted to leave there and come back to
a little
Phoenix.
side note about Rochelle, she applied to work at his restaurant when she got out of culinary school because she heard it was the toughest in the city and she wanted to work there.
And it was.
Nice, yeah.
Well, it's funny because I was going to ask you, was there some catastrophic world event that occurred when you opened up Fat Ox? And it wasn't a catastrophic world event, and not catastrophic, that's not the best word, but some absolute chaos opening 2 restaurants at once. So
correct. That was it. Right. That was self-inflicted.
I'd say you're glutton for punishment, possibly, yeah.
Yeah, right?
And speaking of Rochelle, I believe they're opening today in Flagstaff.
Oh, yeah,
Her new
we're very
restaurant,
excited
Atria.
about Atria.
Yeah.
Atria, that's Rochelle's. So I met Rochelle at Helton. We did a beer with, there was like 7 chefs.
Oh, 7
Tammy,
chefs.
Adam
Yep.
Allison,
Yep.
Jeff Krause.
Yeah,
a
it
lot
was all
of,
the chefs that had won Chopped or had
Yes,
some
Nick
kind of tie to
LaRosa,
Chopped. Yeah.
but Rochelle was there. She was great. She jumped on the podcast, and it's kind of you were talking about beer dinners before. That's my specialty is beer. Like
Nice.
I come from a Midwest background of Busch Light, right? But I found the finer things
Nice.
in craft beer. Yeah, but no, Rochelle's awesome. So
No, and she's still here in the restaurant. She'll be going up to Flag to open that restaurant for the next 4 to 6 weeks. She's got to be back here for Christmas and New Year's. That's our busiest
Right.
10 days of the year consecutively, or a couple days before Christmas and through New Year's. But and then she may go back up for a little while just to get that restaurant kind of settled. But she's still the executive chef here at this restaurant and has been now 5 years since we opened.
I can't
and
believe
again,
it's 5 years.
When she called, I hadn't hired an executive chef. I didn't know who was going to do it. I hadn't found anybody. And when she called and said, "I'm coming down, I heard you're opening a new restaurant," I'm like, done. You're perfect. Just because it's so much easier working with somebody you've already worked with or that you communicate well. I shouldn't say even somebody you already worked with because maybe you didn't work well with that person, right? But somebody that I can say 2 words to her and she knows what I'm talking about. Where if I was trying to get you guys to accomplish that same task,
Forget about it.
Okay, pull out your pens, right? Let's take some notes, right? It was
we
even
should
one.
compete. We should have a competition
Right,
to see
right.
who would
Who
do
can
better back
translate,
there.
right, right.
Yeah.
But the point is that ease of use when you're opening, because opening is so stressful and there's so many spinning plates that are going, and your silverware doesn't show up on time or whatever. There's so many curveballs, and that happens when you're opening a restaurant. And having people that it makes a world of difference.
So let's bring it full circle then. In the beginning of the podcast, you were describing this place and what the concept is. Talk through what people can expect when they come and dine here, and maybe some of your more classic, well-known, some of your favorite personal items on the food and the bar list, if you could.
So, again, the initial idea was I wanted a place to make pasta, right? That was kind of the simple thing. And that's always been kind of the heart and soul of our menu here. The other thing that we looked at as we were opening is that I didn't want to be region specific in Italian cuisine. I think it's a little restricting. And I'll be honest, I don't think most people really understand even what that means. So they care if that shape doesn't exist in Sicily, but I'm doing a Sicilian sauce with it. I don't know if anybody really cares. They probably recognize the sauce more than the shape. They probably think that shape it's just pasta, right? Even though there are specific rules to a lot of those things. But, the ability to kind of mix and match. And the other thought process, and that goes into the design of the restaurant, was we're a lot more. Our climate is a lot more like Italy here than, let's say, New Jersey. No offense to New Jersey, but southern Italy, from Rome south, especially on the interior, there's cactuses, there's citrus. I mean, Sicily is a rock. It's got cactus everywhere, everything else. And the things that grow well here naturally, dates, figs, olives, all the citruses, all those things grow in tomatoes. All those grow really well in southern Italy. So there's a little bit of a combination there. And, my partner, Mark Drinkwater, he was part of Mastro's group, so he's pretty versed in the steakhouse world, and we wanted that to be a piece of this as well. But in Italy, that's really not a thing. There's one steak in Italy, it's in Tuscany basically, and the rest of the country, you don't see steaks. You don't eat filet. That they turn that into sauce. That's sugo. Because typically, it was a very poor country for a very long time. Royalty got those upper cuts. 90% of the population was, doing the internals and turning everything into sugos and sauces and vegetable based.
And now we're all hungry
cuisine.
for pasta.
I know. Do you see my eyes? I'm just staring. I'm like, oh my gosh, this just sounds amazing.
So it's kind of like this thing like, okay, we're going to take on the steakhouse, which is great and what we wanted. We wanted to be special. There's 100 steakhouses here in town. We've always been known for it. A lot of people travel here specifically to go to, steakhouses, and some of the best concepts across the country started here, from Mastro's to Ocean 44 and those guys, and they all do a great job. And we just wanted to be we wanted to fill that niche a little bit, but be a little bit different. And obviously that starts with the steaks and what product you're using. 90% of our steaks are coming from Flannery beef out of San Francisco, or Lynn's out of Chicago. We wanted to be a little more unique, on our wood blend, on what we're grilling on, the different salts that we're using, and we also have a whipped Wagyu beef fat blend that we do to brush all our steaks when we're cooking.
Wow.
Yeah, so it just kind of doubles down on the beef fat. So we wanted to kind of rest those in that, but that's a lot of beef fat. So we've created a kind of a rub that you put on there. And between the different wood blends, it's mesquite, pecan, and some oak. The grill, the way that we use it, some of the pre-marinades that we do on the steaks, the salt and the beef fat, there's definitely a unique angle to that. And just doing the best cuts that we can possibly find, which we explore a lot. And we look at a lot of different stuff. We've run a good amount of domestic Wagyu here from Rosewood Ranch, Snake River Farms. Those typically are a little bit harder. Some of those are small farms. They don't produce a lot of products, so they tend to be a feature that we'll run or on a special menu or something along those lines.
How do you go about testing that? Like, how do you go, can I just tell people I'm opening a restaurant and they'll send me cuts of beef that I can...
Yeah.
It'll probably end after a certain point when you stop and you don't order from them, but basically, yeah. We call up and order samples, or they call us and say, hey, the guy from Rosewood Ranch is going to be in town. He wants to bring some samples. So they do come to you, but we search out more than anything. And that's just R&D on our side. You don't know about it unless you find it. I encourage all my chefs and cooks and everybody to be very read a lot, whether it's online or in magazines, or you need to know what's happening in our business everywhere. Well, at least in this country, in the continental anyways.
Tell them to subscribe to A Taste of AZ magazine.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that'll get you in tune with what's going on. Absolutely. No, a good chunk of my time is spent on doing just reading about whatever, whether it's a food section from New York Times, or Eater's got some great websites out there that you see a lot of up and coming information on there. But I find out about products through things like that, and I find out about products through silly ways. I was in Hawaii 2 weeks ago, and one day we were really busy during the trip, but I had a day that was kind of off at the pool, and I considered it was my Mai Tai drinking competition day. And
that's another good
I've got
tip
some
I'm
great
stealing.
pictures in the pool with like 3 Mai Tais, right? But they had this, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Lihakani powder, which is a dried salted plum from China, I believe, that then they sweeten up with like saccharin and aspartame or something. You don't want to know the ingredients. But
So really umami, I
exactly.
bet, right?
But they do a sweet version and a powdered kind of sweet and sour version. They do a rim on the Mai Tai for that, and it was amazing. So I bought a bunch of it. I'm making Mai Tais on Sunday with my
Oh, I was going to say, when are we
With the
going to see
pork?
that here?
Yeah.
Man, where do you live?
Yeah, yeah. It's luau day at my house. So.
Oh, wow.
Because it's my birthday. That's why.
Oh, happy
Are you
birthday,
roasting
man.
the whole pig then?
No, I'm just doing some shoulders tomorrow. I
okay.
don't have the time to get out the cottage cheese in a storage unit. I'm not making that much food. So I'm going to smoke the pig. I'm going to do some Hawaiian pizza with the smoked pork with a macadamia nut, mint, arugula, kind of pesto.
Oh,
and then we're going to do...
Wow.
We're going to do an Italian version with mortadella and this smoked cured pork belly that we get from Fermani out of San Francisco. It's one of the best cured meats I've ever had. We had it on the menu here when we opened, just on kind of our cheese board. Nobody would eat it because it looks kind of like lardo. It looks like 100% fat. It's not, but it looks like it, and people will just. Be like,
ate it.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's like my favorite thing that we don't sell anymore because nobody buys it. But I brought some in today. Actually, I hope it's back there. We're gonna make the Italian version of a Hawaiian pizza. So we'll see how that goes.
Man.
So what do you use at home as just at home? You're, like as far as a smoker goes.
You'd be embarrassed of my inside kitchen because it's like 1972 electric ring. And two of them work. We've been saying we were going to start this remodel before Corona, and obviously everything went.
Yeah.
And now me restarting it, we're 2 years out before we get it fixed. But anyways, we deal with it. Outside, I've got an oval ceramic smoker. It's called a Primo that I've had for about 15 years.
Okay.
That whole pig cooking region also. A chef for Christopher Hussein and Rochelle and I had a barbecue team. So we were the smoke junkies, and we'd go to barbecue competitions. So we were cooking a lot of pig during that time. But
Nice.
so I use that quite a bit. I have an old school, just like Weber gas grill that's like the quick and easy.
Yeah.
But my main piece right now, I've had it for about 9 months, is a master built gravity fed charcoal smoker.
Oh.
And it's digitally fed to a fan. You pour your charcoal down the gravity feed on the side, and then you layer wood chips in between. And so once you turn it on, you just set your temperature, and it maintains that temperature. But you can go up to 800 degrees, so you can use it like grilling burgers or whatever, and straight back down to a 220 pork shoulder smoker in like 15 minutes. So it's super versatile. It's one of the best units I've seen. The heat is super even. I really like it. And I've probably... I think since I've had it, every Monday I typically cook something.
Nice.
Whether it's vegetables or chilies or shoulders and chicken or whatever. Monday's kind of my... Monday night's my cooking night.
We're learning more and more. Do you know where he lives, Christina? We could just show up on a Monday.
It's got to smell through North Scottsdale. Right?
Don't mind if we send that audio clip to Masterbuilt and try and get a licensing fee for it, because I don't think you could get a better testimonial than that.
I'm telling you, the thing's pretty solid. Pretty solid. And I looked at some... I had offset smokers for years, but they're difficult to maintain. You're up every 20 minutes. Overnight, you're going to do a brisket that's 12 hours.
Yeah.
So what, you start that at noon, you're serving it at midnight? That doesn't work. That means you're starting at noon and serving it at noon, right? Or starting at midnight and serving at noon, right? And those old offsets, you were out there constantly like opening the flue a little bit, adding more smoke. Like it was this, you set an alarm on your watch every hour and you never got any sleep. It was a nightmare. This thing is pretty much set it and forget it, and that's the beauty about it. And you get a lot of smoke, and I'm not going to knock the other one that everybody uses, but you just don't get a lot of smoke from that one.
And you probably use it more often because it's...
Well, and it's super easy.
You get sleep at night.
I light it, I turn it on, I can smoke for ribs for 5 hours, and then go out there, take the ribs off, wrap those in foil, and then crank it up to 700, grill whatever else I'm cooking, and then turn it back down and throw the ribs back in, and then 2 hours later come out and they're done.
Yeah.
So it's super versatile.
Masterbuilt?
Masterbuilt.
Okay, good, because now I need to know that for my own personal recommendation.
Yeah, and it's not outrageously expensive, but it's good. I've been super impressed with it.
I like the charcoal edition too.
Yeah,
because I have a Traeger and it's the pellets, right? And it's great. It's a convenience of propane with the, it's got that flavor to it. But burgers, you can't get a good sear on them.
Crank
gets
on
up to
it,
400 maybe. And this is one of the original. It's my father-in-law's old one, and he's so pissed. He's like, mine's double the size, but yours is seasoned, so it tastes better. But I
that's
like
what I'm
charcoal.
making my pizzas in on Sunday.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because it goes to 800 degrees.
Yeah.
Man.
I'm doing some pan pizza. I'm got a stone. I'll experiment with a couple different things. I've never done it before in that, so it'll be a learning curve. Hopefully I get a few pizzas out before the Mai Tais kick.
Yeah. Do you have a backup? Like, do you have a backup chef to help with
my partner Terry's joke, because I tend to have quite a few backyard parties. I enjoy it. Was always, well, Matt, what time are we coming over? I'll come over at 4. When are we going to eat? 5. And then he'd be like, oh, okay. He's like, everybody eat before you go over, because we don't eat till 9 or 10, right? I start drinking, I'm cooking, we're all talking, and it's like I forget about it. So then he started bringing like 3 or 4 dozen Portillo's hot dogs to the party every time.
For the
for everybody eat, because Matt's not going to be ready to feed everybody until then.
But nobody's leaving either.
No,
right?
we're all there.
Leave
I know
Matt-
that. I have a
Matt
captive
Carter
audience.
Yeah. Well, that's how it becomes a performance, and that's how you taste the love in the cooking, right?
Absolutely.
When you're having a good time doing it. Well, Chef, thank you so much for being gracious with your time. I feel like we could go for another 4 hours and not even take a break.
One other quick thing.
We can just do a pasta podcast and go for 2 hours easy.
Right.
I'm in.
Or chiltepines. We've got them at the
Chiltepines.
chiltepines,
We'll
right?
have to have we should do like one of those just on chiltepines or things native to the Southwest, because Matt was one of the first ones, or the first one, I think, to start putting it on a menu.
We've had it on the menu since we opened, and Renee.
The chiltepine dealer is what we call him.
Correct.
Okay.
So he worked at Mission, and that's where he and I discovered that we both, love just
I did not know
Chili's
that
in general.
connection.
He worked
Okay.
at the House Brasserie, which is a restaurant that we had kind of in the middle here.
Yeah, we're going on Monday.
There you go. And we sold that a few years ago. Still a great team there. We know everybody there. They're all awesome. But he and I realized that we both love Chili's, and then he started saying, well, my uncle lives down in Sonora, and he's got access to all these chiltepines. So he started bringing them over, and I started buying a bunch of them. I still have a ton of them, but because they're per gram the most expensive chili on the planet.
Are they really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I have a stash from Renee, and I started growing mine again this year, but I thought that I was losing the peppers, but now I know the birds are
Well,
eating
if you go
them.
out there and you'll see the little pod, the little pellet, looks like a little pad that the pepper was in. It's there. The pepper's just gone. And I thought they were falling on the ground or something.
That's what I thought.
But my plant's got 100 of those, and I've only pulled maybe 10 chilies off of it. But
Because of the birds?
yeah, the birds.
And that's what you were talking about before.
Yeah.
And they don't.
They don't
faces don't
notice
catch
it.
on
And,
fire from
no. And the chiltepene's an interesting pepper. It's like 90% seed. There's no real meat on it. So when you take it and break it open, it's just full of seeds, but it's fiery hot. It's got its own unique heat. There's nothing else like it.
And it's so little, so you don't expect it in it.
No, it'll get you for
And
sure.
it's the only pepper indigenous to this region, right?
Correct. And it's technically, and again, I think there's been a little bit of pushback from this, but I think it was UC Davis went down there and did a big study on it, because not only is it indigenous here, 1, 2 is that it's one of the only peppers they have not been able to cultivate. This is why it's so expensive.
Yeah.
1 is they can't farm it, or every time they've attempted to farm it, the plants just don't like it, don't do well. 2 is that they're so small and they have to be hand-picked, and then they have to be dried out. It's just your yield is nothing. But they said that is the mother of all peppers on the planet, originated from the chiltepine, from northern Mexico, southern Arizona, going into
Might
Texas
be a good story
bit.
for the magazine.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think the trick to cultivate it is train the birds to harvest the peppers, right?
Right,
We had
right.
carrier pigeons
Exactly.
for so many years.
And can you
That's what
guys
makes
just
it
poop down
scalable.
this row? Right. You poop down this row, and then we got it, right? Train the
We've got
birds.
birds
to-
on
They're
leashes somehow.
fertilizing as they're picking.
Exactly.
Come on here. I think we're on to
It's
something.
the
Full
most
circle.
expensive coffee that you can buy, right? Is
Right,
the coffee
that's
bean that
true.
the bird
Right.
eats. I can't remember what it's called. Is
Yeah.
it peaberry or something like that? But
Well, fantastic, Chef. Once again, thank you so much. And I would
thank you.
I think we would all love to circle back and do a pasta or chiltepine or whatever it may be. Any reason for us to all come back here and hang out for another hour.
love to, and maybe it's a listener request.
Oh, there we go.
I haven't
And
done that before.
I can talk, guys. So anybody wants to talk about it, I love
And we
food,
can listen.
So.
Yeah, so we will be here again soon. Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Chef.
Thanks, Chef.
Appreciate it.